back and munge on it for a while, and then start hitting you guys up directly for things. So with that, let me introduce to you Mr. Peter Carignan. Did I pronounce your last name properly?
No, but it's fine.
How do you pronounce it?
I pronounce it Carignan, but pronouncing it wrong. I assumed back in the day it was Carignan.
Well,
it's French.
How you pronounce it is the right way.
You get a certain amount of artistic license, right?
Yeah, right, exactly.
And he's going to give us a talk about serverless.
All right.
So,
Yeah, so as Chris mentioned, my name's Peter. That's my Twitter handle. Follow me if you want any sarcastic kind of IT-related things. And just like a little disclaimer, I definitely won't claim to be an expert on serverless. I'm really passionate about it. Hopefully I can kind of go through that why I think for business reasons and not technical reasons why, in the future, in 2025, the whole push that we have now, like we got to get on the cloud, it's going to be, we have to get to be serverless. So I have some mixed experiences with serverless in production, so I'll definitely can talk about that after, but it's not super interesting, so it's really not going to be a whole crux of the presentation. And so I'll kind of give a talk about kind of my feelings and what I've experienced so far, and give an overview of ServerlessConf, which is a conference entirely based on serverless, which I attended back in the fall at some point. And that was put on by A Cloud Guru, which if you're getting new to AWS and you want to learn more about Amazon, Azure, or I already forgot the third thing, whatever, I'll remember it later. Something else, yeah, thank you. They're a great site. I really recommend them. They treat you, everything is like they treat everything like a 5-year-old, so you really start from the basics, and it gives you a great understanding. And I've met both of the two founders, they're both brothers. I met them, got to talk to them each for like 10 minutes at this conference, and they're real nice guys, so that's pretty cool. So what is serverless? And it's the worst name in the world. I don't know who came up with it. I think everyone has agreed that there needs to be another name besides serverless or something. But what serverless isn't just function as a service. So I think that's kind of one of the most common misconceptions. When people think of serverless, they think of AWS Lambdas, or Azure Functions, Google. I forget what the Google one's called, but I think it's Google Functions as well. And I think that's not really the case. I think serverless to me is more of like an architectural design thought and how you design your systems to not be maintaining servers underneath. And so kind of a definition that I like, which is to the extreme, is you're serverless when you have no cost, when no data is flowing through your systems. So I'm not sure how small it is, but this is a tweet from Ben Keogh, who is a AWS community hero, and he actually is based out in Burlington, Massachusetts, working for iRobot. So if you can't read it, it says, if you have a container that is active when not handling data, it is a server. So I just put that in there to kind of piss people off. So quickly, you're going to talk about like what are the benefits of serverless. It's kind of hard to get a definition of what it actually is. People who are doing serverless, what are they trying to get out of it, and what are they trying to get out of their organization? So I think the main thing is shifting of operational responsibilities. And to me, that's kind of one of the biggest pieces that there is. So I think there is a common misconception when both Microsoft and Amazon release Lambdas and functions respectively that, great, like now that we have this, like we don't need to have an operational, we don't need DevOps anymore. We can just have our software developers. And I think that was pretty naive, and I think everyone's kind of recognizing that was really naive now. So you still have to have those responsibilities, you still need for ops, but what this allows, in my opinion, is for the operationals to be shifted to what actually gives you value to your customers. So for example, has everyone heard about the Intel chip flaw, if you will, that was released last week? Yep. So basically, every single modern processing chip, it's designed to have a little bit of flaw, so you can kind of get some data that you shouldn't be getting. So you have to go in and patch your servers for this update. So I think 2 days after it, or a day and a half after it, Amazon has updated all of their Lambda servers. So everything, if you're running AWS Lambda, like a day and a half into it, you're already updated. You don't have to do any work yourself. You don't have to make any code changes. Wow. There are no necessary deploys on it. Yeah. So if you think about it, if you run your own server, you're gonna have to go in, SSH in, do your yum update, wait for it to go, maybe do some configuration changes, redeploy your app, and that's just for that one server. How long is that going to take you? So that's kind of like something that I really highlight to me, some of the difference in the benefits of serverless. But it's also just more on the day-to-day things. So, for example, if I work with, like, for traditional kind of organizational design, if you work with your DevOps group, a lot of them will be doing, more of like maintaining your servers, providing updates, kind of making sure, keeping them running, keeping the lights on. But what I think serverless will allow you to do is, instead of them keeping the lights on, you can shift that to someone else who can probably do it better than you. And you can have your ops working with the developers and have that more closely, more of a tie against like a true DevOps sort of environment, and really working on like getting your code to be more performant, like reducing memory leaks, kind of getting all that like extra benefits on there, things that will tangibly affect your business's bottom line and provide more value to your customers. So other things are business value, so you can have faster velocity, so you don't have to worry about, think about originally back in the day before cloud computing, if you wanted to make a new app, you had to go online, get approval, buy a server, wait for the server to get delivered to you, set it up. So it's like at least a 3-month lead time to get an app out there in production. So with serverless, you really just are exposed to the business logic of your code, and that really just allows you to focus on what gives you a competitive advantage. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing across IT in general. So for example, if you're on the developer side, you don't necessarily need to code anymore. Like a login app, you don't have to do that anymore. You can go out to whether it's npm or Maven and just pull in someone else's code that they've already done that before. So it's something similar to that. So you really only should be coding and working on what gives you an actual competitive advantage in your business environment. And then the third thing is worth-based development. So because of how the billing structure, so for those who aren't familiar, AWS Lambdas are billed per 100 milliseconds. So for every 100 milliseconds that it runs, you get an incur cost. And it's also combined with the level of CPU that you selected for it to be running on. So basically what you can see for that, and which I think is pretty interesting, is you can see like, okay, this one function is running like 10 times longer than my next function. Like, why is that? So you can either go back, and it gives you actual reasons to refactor your code. So you can be like, if I refactor this code to get it to be 25% more performant, that's an X percent of cost. And that's easier to go back to your business and to tie back in with your business partners on saying, like, this is why we should be refactoring this code, and it kind of like lets that continuous development always keep going. And it lets you think and see like what you're actually spending on a piece of code that you're writing. So is it even worth it to write this application because it's going to cost us X amount of dollars, and it's only going to bring in like Y amount of dollars. So yeah, any questions on that, or anything you disagree with, or anything you want to talk about?
So far, so good.
So I mean, there are big customers still trying to patch those servers. So like you say, a day and a half, like that is very, very fast, and that's an awesome benefit.
Quick question for clarification: are Lambda functions serverless?
Yeah. So I would say Lambda functions are something I would consider to be serverless. So for those of you familiar how they work, you basically can just upload a snippet of your code. It's pretty much any kind of language now, and it'll just run it as a function, so you can expose it, as a REST endpoint, or have you trigger it off other events.
Can you give a couple other examples of serverless services?
Sure. Yeah, and so I guess there's a gray line, and there's a lot of disagreements on it. But I guess my opinion of what's serverless is if you don't have to do any maintenance on either like the server or the container. So for example, like a Docker container, it could be considered like you don't have to host a server, but you have to go back like even once in a while and provide updates to that container. So other products on the Amazon space I would consider serverless. I think S3 was probably the first serverless offering. So that's their object database storage. Fargate's a new one that just came out. So Fargate's is kind of like the container serverless offering where you don't have to manage the cluster. Amazon SQS, which is their queuing, the queuing system. I think that's serverless. I'm trying to think. They actually, Amazon Aurora just announced they have like a new serverless kind of offering, which is super cool and crazy. So I can try to think of some more ones too, but at the top of my head, those are kind of like the main ones I think of. And I can go into later about how other stuff can be serverless. So for example, like how you can have different versions of like serverless databases, and even how as an organization you can host your own like serverless kind of application.
I have a question, I guess, for everybody else. Who's used Lambda or touched Lambda, tried it out at all? Anybody? Yeah. You guys haven't really tried to find it? No. Curious.
So I just have a comment, and you guys can let me know whether my opinion is correct, or you guys have a different opinion. From my perspective, right? So Lambda basically provides, this serverless capability. You basically pay for the usage. I use it, I run it. I take up so much of whatever the underlying infrastructure is. I just pay for it. So if I am a business, stepping aside from that particular statement, if I am a business executive, I'll basically think, and you touched upon it, all the all the IT needs to do is, they need to kind of focus on, business logic, doing the development. I just pay for it. It is a step up from cloud computing. But the way how I look at it is, you just can't have Lambda functions, do all the business logic. You still need RDS. You need database. You need queuing infrastructure. You need all the other things. From my how I look at the serverless or Lambda is, it's just a glue or a gateway to do other things. You still need the other, databases, messaging infrastructure. You still need all those services that AWS provides. It's not just, a solution that solves all, all the other problems. That's what I think, but I'm curious. What
No, I would completely agree with that statement today. I think there are a lot of things that, for example, Lambda functions can't do. There's a lot of weaknesses of it. I'll touch upon that a little bit later. But I think the really cool thing about where Lambdas are and like serverless in general is it's cutting edge that it's not even cutting edge yet. I think that was kind of like the common theme that I've kind of gotten out of like a lot of the SMEs is that it's pre-cutting edge. So I think I agree with you. As today, there's a lot of like gaps in what it can do. But I think what I kind of envision it going over the next 10 years, I think based on kind of what it offers and I think where it's going to grow, I think we can talk about a little bit more. Where eventually, I think one day we'll be able to get to that. So I think like 2025, I would guess, is kind of the time where it would be like full mainstream and like everyone's panicking about like I need to be serverless. But yeah, I definitely agree.
It feels like it displaces the idea of having to run, say, your Java guy, Tomcat,
Right.
or those containers, those Java containers, or whatever the .NET containers.
Right. And I think I kind of rambled on for quite some time, but in essence, my question basically would be, what are the limitations, of serverless? That would be, if I have to just put it as a question, that would be my question.
Yeah, I'll talk about that in a couple slides. I think I have one where I'll go over a little bit high level for you, but there's definitely a lot of limitations.
Yeah.
One of the cool things though is that, without getting into the semantic differences between serverless versus platform and all that stuff, is like nowadays you can still get a ton of cost savings through all of the cloud offerings, right? So in other words, if you did want to do what you described, yes, you need a caching system, or you need a database, the platform offerings for that, right? In other words, I still don't have to say, I can only use Lambda for this, but I still have to spin up an on-prem database or something.
Yep.
Nope, there's a platform offering that will put all that together. So I mean, there's complete solutions being built today with serverless that are functional. There are limitations, of course, but I'm just saying, like, it's important not to get too limited in that. Like, there are limitations, but wow, I mean, it's amazing how quick we're moving.
Yeah.
There's one that you said, like Fargate, you consider serverless.
Kind of. That's a
Yeah.
stretch.
Trying to get my head around it.
Because I just like, I think it has some of the characteristics of being serverless, like, your work-based work, but you can see what it's costing you. But it's more, to me, it seems like it's like a resource and management abstraction for like elastic containers. Because there's something that's always constantly running there, but you just don't know about it. You don't manage it.
Right. I guess that would kind of fit my definition, or that's where it slightly fits my definition of serverless, is that you don't have to manage it. So I think that's one of the true benefits of the serverless kind of design and like the different offerings is you don't have to do any maintenance on that like application. So like it abstracts away the management for you, because I mean that's where I like my thing that I come back to is what do you do that actually provides value to your customer? Now, like if your organization like 20 years ago was like, okay, like we can host these containers really well and we'll host them for other companies, then like I would say that's great. But now it's kind of like tough luck, like Amazon already did that and figured that out like 20 years ago, so you're kind of screwed. So it's kind of almost better to like let Amazon kind of handle that for you, because like no offense, but Amazon probably can fix it and do that better than you can. So like why would you waste your money paying people to manage a container when you can have them like working on your actual applications that like drive that customer value? So I think it's like a super great line. But that's kind of where I come back to. It's like getting away from the maintenance, and so you don't have to actually pay people to do the maintenance. You can pay your people to actually work on making your app more performant or whatever it may be.
Maybe I think it's not just the responsibility that you shift, also to some degree the liability. So,
Yeah.
and the whole thing becomes, I think, like a point of view, like where you stand. Think of MongoDB. Who would think MongoDB is serverless? Nobody?
It depends.
Yeah,
You're
exactly.
paying Mongo for it.
It depends. So like you can buy managed MongoDB databases. For you're not dealing with any EC something instances, EC2 instances, and making scaling up and down. It's all done for you. So from your point of view, what you're paying for is a database that scales up and down. You don't have to apply any updates, nothing. You just put data in and get data out.
Yeah, Mongo actually just released, it's in beta still, but they have Mongo Stitch, which is like a true serverless offering where you can just interact with them via REST endpoint, and then you just kind of pay for whatever data that you currently have in there at the time. Which is
Yeah,
interesting.
and of course it's running on servers, but
Yeah, which is, yeah.
but-
I had a better shirt that said like serverless isn't a thing, it's just someone else's fully managed executional environment. I forgot this was today and I hadn't watched it yet.
Serverless washing machines.
So yeah, so now I'll go through a couple of like highlights of the speakers that I went to the conference for to see, like kind of just give a quick overview and like provide the links to, I'll send out the slides, provide the links to these presentations. They're all at least a little under half an hour and they're really good to listen to. So this was from St. Grunberg, so he's one of the co-founders of A Cloud Guru. So he kind of just gives, and this is where I got my thing for doing a clickbait title, because he jokingly did a clickbait title of 10 tips for running serverless business, number 6 will blow your mind. So he kind of just does a quick overview of how they came up with their video content website. It was really interesting because he was like, I don't have a grandmaster plan of doing a serverless thing. It kind of came out of necessity. He basically had 4 weeks of vacation. He canceled his vacation with his family, locked himself in his room, spent 2 weeks and failed to try and do something. Went back to the drawing board, kind of came up with, okay, like I'll use like have an Angular. I think it was before this. It was like a webhook instead of a Lambda function, and it's called out to a Google Firebase, and that's how he was able to get a website without having any hosting fees, because him and his brother were just doing this in their spare time. But he's super interesting. He actually wrote the defrag code for Windows Vista and Windows 7, which I thought was wild for a serverless guy to transition to coming from writing these defrag codes for these operating systems. So that's a really interesting topic. So this is Mark. So he was a security guy. I don't have any good pictures for him, but he kind of just goes through the basic components of serverless security. So it was kind of interesting taking a security view of things. And kind of what he comes back with is kind of to pay attention to the certifications that vendors have. So if you're looking to offload your work to different vendors, whether it's AWS or it's Microsoft, make sure to check to see like, okay, is this database like HIPAA compliant? Does it have like all these? What kind of certifications does it have? And that's kind of a good way just to make sure what you're using is safe. And you can see here he ranked kind of the different stuff of why serverless was good or not good. So that's something that was pretty interesting from a security perspective. So I'll tie this back. This is Ben Keogh, who I mentioned earlier, and I showed the tweet from. And this is not coming out well at all. But basically what he kind of talked about was he compared event sourcing to serverless. And this is kind of where he kind of came up with all like the drawbacks of serverless. So basically, to summarize, like they're both kind of shit is what he kind of came back with. There's a lot of gaps in both of them. The main gap was really around observability of your environments and what's coming out in production. So if you think about it, like why did people go to monolith databases originally? Like why do we have one database hosting one application? It's because it was so hard to tell what was going on in your systems and how. So we're like, all right, if we combine everything to one, at least it's one place to look at and like one unknown. So we haven't maybe gotten that much better at that. I think as anyone's gone to true microservice approach, you can kind of see that kind of telling what goes on between your interactive systems, it's not that easy. So he talks a little bit about that. And then the other thing, to go back to your question from earlier about like what are some of like the limitations. The biggest limitation that I think from serverless, and that we're going to need to recover, and I think we can get over it, is around service discovery. So how do you know like how much your service is being used? How do you know what the service is there? How do you get around some of that stuff? So I think that's going to be the biggest thing, is around like kind of the traditional service discovery, and how do you have that being like monitored and kind of that thing. So I think that's kind of the biggest limitation.
Can you go back just for a
I'm
minute?
gonna take his slides and put them in the Slack channel, and
Okay.
I'll also have them on the YouTube channel as well.
Thanks. Yeah. By the way, there's an event-driven architecture that was mentioned down there at the
Yeah.
bottom. I think that goes into this direction of like reliable architectures and the CQRS and
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's what I was thinking too. Yeah, he does a good job talking about event-driven architecture. Because I mean, Lambdas are like primed for event-driven architecture. If you use full AWS, for example, you know, you can be like, all right, if my DynamoDB table gets updated, trigger this Lambda, which will trigger this SQS service, which will trigger another Lambda. So you can have a whole chain of things. But I think, you know, that's how it's set up today, and that's how you would kind of work with today. But I think going forward, right, I think there's way more opportunities for that. It's just so cutting edge that it, you know, hasn't been fully built out yet. So there's a bunch of people talking about observability. So basically kind of what that is, I'm not gonna lie, I'll butcher what people say it is, but it's basically taking like monitoring to another step and truly understanding with distributed systems like the unknown of the unknown of the unknown. So the three people who I talked about, who I can share some of their talks, who I thought were brilliant. So Randall Hunt, which I actually just learned is coming here next month.
Next month.
Yeah, so he started out at Mongo at SpaceX, and now he's like an AWS senior tech evangelist. His job's awesome. All he does is talk about AWS and fly around all over the world. So he gave a really cool talk about his time at SpaceX. So it's pretty interesting to watch. So he's basically, there's some rule from like the Cold War era, how you can't talk about space travel. So like he had to redact out like everything that he was saying, which is interesting.
The first rule about space travel is you don't talk about space travel.
Yeah, it's kind of like Fight Club. It's weird. Yeah.
It's so weird. Yeah.
But yeah, so he was saying one of his actual former employers, or former peers, a developer, dropped out of SpaceX, went back to law school, and is now a lawyer and a lobbyist to try and get this like revoked. So it's a crazy thing. But he talks about how there was an error in one of their an application that calibrated and made sure that all the timings for the space launches were all correct, so they're all like going in the right direction, the right angle. And there was like a memory leak. And you know, he said he had figured it out eventually, but it took him like 20 more hours before he finally got permission to deploy that fix. And this was again like the day before they had one of their major releases. And I don't know if you've ever like heard or seen any of Elon Musk's kind of opinions on things, but I don't think. But pushing back the launch wasn't an option. And so it was interesting to hear his thoughts around that and how Amazon X-Ray, which I don't know if anyone had heard of, but it's kind of one of their monitoring tools, how that would have helped this solution. And then Jillian McCann, she's actually a peer at Liberty Mutual. She gave a really amazing presentation on how they use Lambdas and serverless for their chatbot technology. And she gave you actual use cases as well as like X-ray demonstrations. So that was one of the better ones I would say in terms of content of what you're going to see. And then so she also went through again X-ray and all the things they can do. So if you haven't checked it out, it's pretty cool. It basically gives you a lot of insight into what all of your Amazon services, how they're interacting with each other, and you can catch kind of like a lot of different defects with it. And the third one was Charity Majors. So she was a character and a half. She started her own company called Honeycomb.io. So she's a former DevOps person. So she's kind of pushing for more transparency on distributed systems, and she shits on software developers, and it does the whole thing. Her presentation was called, the title of it was Even Unicorns Poop or something like that. It was the whole thing.
Pretty outspoken.
Yeah, she's very outspoken. And I think like once she went on and she like dropped a couple F-bombs, everyone else after that was like, all right, we're fine. So this was John Wallace, so he was one of like kind of the two keynotes at the end. I had never heard of him before, but I Googled him during his presentation. So I don't know if you've ever been familiar, but like IBM has like red books where they release, where they're like pretty long books they have to write, and I think they have like a lot of peer reviews they have to go through. And it seems that it's like an honor to have written one of them. I think he wrote 7 of them. He self-proclaimed himself as like this, like the senior most father of like DevOps, and basically claimed that no one knows more about DevOps than he does.
Nobody argued with him either.
Yeah, no one really argued with him. So he was good. So he kind of talked about serverless from a DevOps perspective, and a lot of cool things. And I think, as we talked about DevOps a little bit earlier, as people want to know more about it, this is a really good definition of DevOps, in my opinion. DevOps is a set of practices and patterns that turn human capital into high-performance organizational capital. So again, just more tying it back to like, don't forget, like, it's not about the technology. It doesn't matter what technology you're using. You're doing this for your customer, and providing that value. The other thing that you talked about was tribes going to tribe. So basically, what you're saying, there's the DevOps tribe, there's like the serverless tribe, and you would always think that when a new tribe comes up, they'll learn from previous tribes before them. But no, like it's always acting like kind of like a child and a father, like yeah, okay, dad, like I got it, like I don't need to learn from you. So he's saying like that's how it's always going to go, but you probably shouldn't go that way. All right, so this guy, has anyone ever heard of Simon Wardley? So he's a genius. So if you're gonna watch any of the presentations, or if you're not gonna watch any of them, watch this one presentation. It's called Why the Fuss About Serverless. He's a brilliant public speaker, very entertaining. He talks about Spartans in the 300s in his presentation here. So anything you tie it back to IT is always great. So he kind of talks about, he goes through a really good business explanation of why serverless is the thing that's going to be. And he kind of invented this concept called mapping, and he'll go into how that came about. But basically, he was the CEO of a Photoshop company back in the day, and he was like, I didn't know what I was doing, so he kind of came up with this concept called mapping. And then basically, a consulting company came in and said, hey, just kidding, this cloud-based thing isn't the way to go. 3D TV is the way to go. So like the whole board, fired him, and they went that route. And then so he went into Ubuntu. He's I think the CEO of Ubuntu. I don't know if you've ever seen the market share of Ubuntu on public cloud computing, but I think it's like 80% of all public clouds use Ubuntu. So that's that guy. So he goes through his whole mapping targets of why serverless kind of exists now and where it's going to go, and the whole prediction about it. So he's brilliant. Really great public speaker. I really can't do him justice, but if you're going to do one presentation, definitely check out this guy.
Did he do the mission statement generator?
Yeah, so he did the mission statement generator, or that was him. So I can try and find it now, but he has he kind of came up with how every mission statement was the same thing. So he came up with a random mission statement generator. It's on GitHub somewhere. I'll find the link and send it to you. But it's basically, you can just hit replay, and it comes up with like a whole mission statement. And then you look eerily familiar, like you've definitely seen this before. And he talks about how he sent them out to like 3 different people, and one was like, oh, that's already our mission statement. Someone else was like, oh, that sounds pretty good. And the third person one says, oh, like, are you for hire? So it's a funny guy. Yeah. So yeah, he does the mapping, the mapping, which is pretty cool. And then yeah, mission statements, and I'm trying to think what else he had done. I met him. I talked to him. I rode the elevator with him at the conference, and I was like in the elevator, just like, oh my god, this guy's my hero.
Did you fanboy?
No, I didn't fanboy. I fanboyed a little bit later, but not then. I held it in. Yeah, so that was just serverlessconf. So if you want to check it out, it's I'll send you the link, but it's serverlessconf.io. They have around 2 a year. They're not really great at announcing beforehand. Like they just announced last week that the next one's going to be February 14th and 15th in France. But it was really cool. I think there was around like 300 people there. And I think I got personally to meet the head of AWS's Lambda department, Tim Wagner. There's the head of the Microsoft, the project manager for Microsoft Azure Functions for Google. I met the people from IBM OpenWhisk, but I won't announce that because I'm not super proud of that part. And then as long as like MongoDB and a bunch of other groups. So it was really interesting, and it was a really good experience. And it wasn't super expensive, so I would definitely recommend it if anyone is super interested in this space and want to go. It was a really good conference. You gotta it was so small, and you gotta meet a lot of people and get a lot of what's going on and a lot of the players kind of in the game.
Did you go to the one in New York?
Yeah, so I went to the one in New York this year.
Okay.
It was in Hell's Kitchen. It was the hotel that we stayed at was called the Hotel Yotel. So it's like a spin-off of, I don't even know, it used to be in like at the London airport, but it's basically, it was like a 100 square foot room, but it was actually pretty nice, and it was interesting. It was just an interesting place.
Oh.
So yeah, so that was kind of like a quick overview and like quick, not quick, of all the interesting speakers and kind of the people that I have learned from and like to follow. I put all their Twitter handles on there. They all post great stuff on Twitter, so definitely check that out. Yeah, so talk a little bit more about Superwillfull. So that was kind of a term coined by Patrick Dubois. So that's kind of just more around what I was talking about earlier, with it's more than just like lambdas. You kind of want to like, it's more just a concept of everything you should be doing is trying to just get away from that maintenance kind of layer and just focusing on kind of what gives you value for your company. And the big thing for that is ephemeral compute. So that basically just means that whatever you do, you don't need to like, it shouldn't be like kind of saved. You should be able to like, if your application, it can be able to like die down to nothing and come back up, and you shouldn't need to be able to like save your computing power. You should be able to die and come back to life with like no repercussions. And that's kind of what we talked about earlier, which I think you asked a good question on. Is there are ways to be like serverless without using, for example, like an AWS product. So like, for example, like if you publicly or you privately host a MongoDB instance and you have to pay operational people to keep that afloat, to scale it and to whatnot, you could also kind of take like Mongo Atlas and kind of pay for Mongo to do that, which may be more money, but then it's also shifting that responsibility. And again, shifting that responsibility I think can be scary. It's important to know from what I've seen to understand the relationships of like when something goes wrong. So for example, I don't know, have anyone in this room been affected by like the Amazon S3 outages that happened over like, there's like 2 of them last year? So I was affected for both of them. Miranda, that's a lie, I know you were.
No, I nodded.
Oh, I didn't see it, I didn't look. So yeah, so I mean, and that's kind of the thing where you have to know like what's your responsibilities with Amazon, how do you like escalate that, and you kind of have to trust, and I think this is the hardest part, is you have to trust that they're going to do a better job fixing it than you are. And that's like, no way, it's not trying to be insulting, but it's just more of like economies of scale, and like you can't do everything the best, so you have kind of to export out what people can do better than you. So yeah, so talking a little bit more about containers. So I think containers can have a way in a serverless environment if you kind of get, depends who you ask. I think there's a good way of you can use containers in a serverless way. So for example, say for example, I'm running like an organization and my department is responsible for all the billing operations. So I can be using containers to do a billing kind of server, billing as a service, and then if I allow, say, other people in my organization, so say, if you want to like bill your customers, if I provide some kind of like REST endpoint and charge you a certain amount or however the chargeback works, I think there are some ways to get around that with using like containers being serverless if you get like creative around the definitions. So I think there is a place. I think there are use cases because I understand and I definitely agree that you can't just throw lambdas in any single application and have that work. So I think there are like different ways around it of thinking about it, but it's really all again around economies of scale. And if you think of, I think I've seen some statistics around it, but one of the biggest kind of costs is the duplication of effort across IT organizations. And all that is the worst in the private sector. So for example, like I think I saw some survey where it was like how many developers who have like 5 or more years of experience have written like a login app or login code before, and I think it was like a 95% hit rate. And then there's some more around some like of the top like 100 organizations, what their duplicate systems are, and some of them are in like the thousands of duplications. And I know like, I definitely know from personal experience that's a thing if we just keep duplicating systems. So I think that's something that trying to be serverless will have in mind of trying to push to more of the API first and try to have less duplicated systems because that just costs money. This is something I ran into. I haven't really played around with too much, but it's called Kubeless.io. So it uses Kubernetes in the serverless framework. And by serverless framework, there's a product called Serverless, which provides a wrapper on top of Microsoft, Google, and Amazon, and some others to provide you that function capability. So that was pretty interesting. I haven't done too much with it, but it's basically lets you spin up and spin down Kubernetes in an ephemeral commute capacity. So you don't have to worry about maintaining them or having anything being saved, and that kind of handles it for you. it's pretty interesting. It's still super new, so if you want to check it out, let me know how it is. I'd definitely be pretty cool about it. And again, we were talking about this earlier, but the biggest thing I think about serverless is a finely grained billing, so how that ties back to organization. I know today, for at least from where I work, you don't really know like what your app, you have your server and it kind of runs there and you don't really get charged back directly. So I think that's something that really needs to change. As a developer, you should know like what every line of your code that you write, how much that's costing you, and how much that's bringing in. And the other thing they have is private cloud. So for example, I kind of talked about it earlier, you can still use your private cloud to make serverless applications for other parts of your organization to use. I guess I would caution, we kind of talked about it earlier, about the multi-cloud kind of balancing act. I understand the need to not have vendor lock-in, but I also, from like what I've just seen and kind of think of hypothesize about, I'm kind of terrified of having your own private cloud that you manage, balancing your code between Amazon, balancing your code between Microsoft. And the main reason for that is they're all different. If you look at all those services that are offered, like they all have different tweaks to them in order to get your code to run in that one area. So I think in order to if you're trying to spend effort to get your one application to run on like 4 different vendor product softwares, is that really giving you the value? I would definitely kind of question that. And this may be my last slide, so I'll just check really quick. I know it's guys, that's a bit more.
For that private cloud, I have a little, or actually a huge anecdote. So for those I haven't talked to yet, I work for Siemens, so pretty big company, and over the years, one of the mantra had always been, it's got to run everywhere, anywhere, everywhere. So before all cloud computing, it had to run on Windows and on Linux, then it had to run on Azure and AWS, and so there are probably dozens of projects that just didn't even, then they never took off because they were then designed to be the lowest common denominator, or had to have abstraction layers, then run into performance problems and all that. So my personal viewpoint on that is, well, lock-in is okay. Just choose smart.
Yeah, so I had the same thing of that.
It lets you build something on it.
I've seen it happen, I've been doing this for a long time, right? You spend an awful lot of extra money up front trying to make sure that your code base is portable. You can move from, whether it's from one cloud to another, from a Java container to another Java container or whatever. And frequently you end up locking in anyway into the abstraction pattern you're using, right? And you never, so you pay all this money up front to make sure you're portable. You never port it anywhere, and then, or when you do, you spend just as much money porting it as you would have if you just locked in anyway to begin with, right? So it takes a lot longer to get your ROI.
You spend 2-3 years just building your infrastructure and platform.
It's complicated way too much.
And taking all the requirements and stuff, and then never get to market.
So I'll basically say that wherever your app is working, make it work efficiently. And if you fail, if you are able to recover from that failure as fast as you can, that's okay.
I see you end up adding complexity to it to make sure it's portable, and that complexity makes it more difficult to debug, diagnose, correct. Just you don't have the support of those primary vendors anymore. You need support from that middle tier.
Yeah, plus you never report it. Right. Which I think is one of the things that's interesting about kind of AWS, for example, is the pricing methods is different. So you're not necessarily paying for a contract of saying I'm going to use your EC2 instance for 5 years. It's more kind of as a pay-as-you-go in some respects. EC2 is a terrible instance because you probably would pay for it as what you want. But for example, it's more of a pay-as-you-go, whereas you have some other vendors where you're like, all right, I'm locked in a contract with you for the next 3 years. I think that kind of gives you a little bit different vendor lock-in too. And I think, so I'm glad to hear that people kind of agree with vendor lock-in's not a bad thing. I think one of my favorite quotes is like, if you want to avoid vendor lock-in, then just sit in your hands all day. So.
I think it's interesting, one thing you said earlier about economies of scale, very real, and they're very powerful now, but I also think it is important to watch. I mean, you mentioned the Amazon S3 outages. Microsoft has some examples I could quote, and where we created our own problems by scaling so large. And so it is important to watch that there's like economies of failure at first, and then they turn into economies of scale. So I do think it's wise to be judicious about how far you jump into some pool of water before you tested it out at all, or you have a feeling for it. Like, for example, watching our Office 365 service, platform as a service, you laugh very strongly. That's awesome. It started rough. It started very rough.
It's just big.
I mean, well, it started big, fast, loud, crazy. I mean, it used to be that I'd show up to work and it was a question of how long would the service be down. It wasn't if the service was down. Whereas now, I mean, years in, it's super stable. It's amazing. I mean, there's some amazing value there, right? And similar with Amazon S3 is amazing. Then you get to this point where it's so big, and then they had one issue, like, oh crap, we didn't think of that, and it goes down for a whole day or whatever. So it's just important to watch, I think, if you are concerned about that. And then, as soon as you get that confidence, economies of scale are very real.
Right, I think that goes back to too, it's really understanding your vendor, like what they're offering, what certifications they have, and then understanding your relationship with them. So if this goes down, like how are we going to work on fixing this? Okay, so how to start? So I think Steve maybe put the slide in, so I'm trying to remember what I was going to talk about. So I think, I'm just going to remember. So I think, so if you're in a current organization today, I think it depends. I think ideally, obviously you'd want to have like greenfield, new development, and then you kind of do everything with serverless. You could spin up everything. I think that would kind of be the ideal way. I know most people don't work in that ideal way, so what I've kind of seen is you can use it to replace like one-off, like more back-end, like event-driven stuff. So for example, if you want something to trigger when your build happens, you can use like a Lambda function, and you can get comfortable with it kind of going that way and building it up, and then you kind of build it more into like having like different areas of your application that you want to replace. I'm trying to remember what this example was that they were using. This is like an Australian company where they merged two companies and they redid like their product management system with Lambdas, which is kind of crazy. So it's all about kind of like starting somewhere small, I think, and getting more, I think it's more easily tuned, as you mentioned before, from like an event kind of based approach, and that's where it's built today. And then I've seen people build it up into doing it to more traditional like service style architecture. So for example, something that I've been playing around with is using a Swagger file. So I have a Swagger file that I use, and I push that Swagger file, so that has my full definition of my API using OpenSpec. So that can say like, get pet or whatever it may be. And I can push my Swagger file out to API gateway as part of my code deploy. And that Swagger file then will generate my API gateway, which will have that contract for me. And then off that Swagger file, you can generate a CloudFormation template, and that CloudFormation template can now stand up like a shell instance basically of that Lambda for you. And then you can kind of put that coding stuff in. So that was what I was playing around this weekend, which shows how much of a life I have. Yeah, so I think that's kind of where to start. I think there's a lot of cool tools. It's kind of just getting out there and playing around. It's super easy to do it through the console. It's more of a pain in the ass once you get to start using, the command line interfaces. There's a lot of cool stuff. I would just kind of go out there and start playing around with it. I'm trying to think of some of the other highlights. For the Microsoft shout out, if you do use Azure Functions lets you pause your functions like mid-function and wait for a response to come back, and you don't get billed for that, and it kind of keeps the state, which I hate saying. But that's pretty cool, so if you have ever like long-running applications that's worked on. So for example, say you have an API call that you're exposing to a consumer, and you want to, it takes like 10 seconds, and you don't want to pay for that one function to sit there for 10 seconds to return a response back. I've seen demos of them pausing it, and then kind of waiting for the other function to happen, get the response back, and it returns it, so that kind of keeps your cost down. So there's a bunch of cool stuff out there that you can play around with. I'll definitely be happy. Post in Slack. I'll send you out, there's a Serverless Slack group, which is pretty cool, that all like the AWS community heroes are in, and they comment on and stuff. So I can definitely send you some stuff on where to start today. So there's definitely a lot of cool stuff out there. Really, the sky's the limit. It's so easy. I think when I first learned about Lambdas, from the time I first learned about Lambdas to reading about them to understanding, then to deploying something out there and getting a REST API to work, just a basic hello world thing, I think it took me like 5 minutes. And I was like reading it and being like, oh, that's what this is, and then like coding something. So it's super cool, super fast. And if you're just getting into coding, it's honestly a great way of doing it. You don't have to worry about any kind of the setup stuff, and it's great.
So can I ask like a new question?
Yeah.
So if I have a traditional app that has a bunch of APIs that are all hosted on a server instance.
Yep.
If I want to make those serverless, each one of those APIs is its own Lambda thing?
Yeah.
When I'm done?
Yeah, so, or they could be multiple Lambda things.
But it still has to talk to a Mongo database, and
Yep.
that's up all the time. But these other APIs just
Yeah,
come
so
up
the
when you
theory,
need them,
right,
and
so
then
the
they
theory
go away
behind
when
it would
they're
be, yep, you would only basically, you wouldn't pay for your server that's being run, you would just pay per invocation of your Lambda function. And they bill you per 100 milliseconds, with a minimum being 100 milliseconds. And then based on, you can choose different like CPU and memory that the function uses to run. So it'll make it execute faster. And actually from what I've seen, sorry, it's getting too technical. But from what I've seen, it's actually cheaper to choose a higher memory option than choose the basic one because it executes that much faster and then it gives you that like cost savings. But yeah, so basically, yeah, that's how it kind of works. And then what you could do is with the new Mongo 3.6 release, they incorporated streaming into their databases. So you can kind of, basically what it comes down to is you can listen with your Lambda function off of a Mongo database stream. So you can, like, if someone saves something to your Mongo database, it can trigger another one of like your Lambda functions.
But like one of the first steps could be, and correct me if I'm wrong because I'm not the best dev on this, but like you pick one of those API endpoints and say like, all right, we want to try this in Lambda, for example, and you'd want to say like, okay, what are the logical pieces of that, and try to pick the simplest one, and then boom, you'd have still that API endpoint, but then behind it you'd have how many functions do you need? You figure that out.
Right.
But that's where I think there's a layer of abstraction there that you get now. Instead of a monolith behind an API, you've got potentially multiple functions behind an API. Is that helpful in any way? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
Well, I think of it.
as long as your APIs are like small enough actually implementations inside to start out, just to try it on your own, you could like just copy and paste your entire implementation code, put it inside a Lambda function, and then connect that to like an API gateway or whatever kind of means you want to get to connect to it.
Right now, they're all glommed into one gigantic C# file.
Yeah, so
So
I don't actually know if Amazon offers C# yet.
Yeah, I was just saying.
Well, it does .NET Core, supports .NET Core.
Does it?
Yeah.
I'm not a
I'm
Windows
more
guy,
interested
so I
in the
don't know that
concept
one.
than the actual implement. Like
Yeah.
thinking about an app, I wouldn't build
Yeah,
it into
so-
a giant C# file.
Right, you would
Build
try
an
and do
IaaS,
it,
I would
what you
instead
would maybe try and do
try to have
is have
independent
like
ones.
each method maybe be its own like Lambda function, and then those kind of methods would trigger each other. You really just want to get it to be like the lowest like invocation time possible for basically for like billing purposes. And it's also for kind of like simplicity too, I guess.
Hey, Pete, what language do
But
you
if
usually write?
you're .NET, you just do a web role
Right.
or something like that.
Pete, what language usually have you typically built these things in?
I've done the combination of the three that I normally do are either Java, Node, or Python. Java, because most people at work are familiar with that. I wouldn't really recommend it. It's pretty heavy duty. But I would say actually Spring just came out with Spring Cloud Functions, which is really cool and it lets you do all kind of like the Spring capabilities and annotations inside your function. I actually did just write an app using it. It's really cool. So that actually would be a one use case I would suggest Java. Node and Python go back and forth. A lot of people hate JavaScript, so the Python people. One of the concerns around Node is around having the callbacks and how that could let your function live longer than it should. So it really kind of just depends on your preference on like what you're comfortable with and what your organization is comfortable with. And that actually reminded me of the one issue that I have seen too, a limitation of Lambdas today, at least with Amazon, is latency issues. So for example, I had a function that would execute in under a millisecond. When I threw it on top of an API gateway and just did like a postman request from my laptop, it would come back at like 175 milliseconds, I think was the average. So that's 174 milliseconds just pure latency. That's known. Amazon knows this. I've talked to the Lambda team about it. I know they're working on trying to get that down, and that's something that they need to improve upon. But if you're trying to be super performant, and that 100 milliseconds means a lot to you, that's just something that I would definitely consider.
All right.
Cool.
You over time?
We're not over time. So one real quick thing.
Oh, I have one more slide, I guess.
Okay, cool.
This is something that came out for me. But so this I can just like a minute. These are a bunch of different kind of companies that are out there. So, you know, Azure, Google, Microsoft are kind of the main ones. There's a lot of spin-offs which are trying to do different things with serverless. So standard lib provides you like a full forced platform. I'm not gonna lie, I honestly didn't fully get what they're talking about. But their CEO has made some really interesting points about serverless. He actually compared it to PHP. With the fact that PHP development, you just wrote your file and you pushed it, you let your web, you know, kind of your internet company kind of handle it for you and host it for you. And he said that was the original serverless, which I thought was interesting. He's also my age and talking to like, so he was 28, 29, and he was talking about coding back in like 1995, speaking like he was there. It was really interesting. He's a character. And then there's Spotness, so that's using Amazon EC2 spot instance prices to basically host functions for you. So that was a pure cost play. So they're basically saying, we'll use EC2 spot instances. If you don't know what those are, it's kind of like the stock market for EC2. So basically you can just bid on certain prices at certain times. So they were using that to run your functions for you in their like predefined function environment. So that was kind of like a pure spot play. Binaris was pretty cool. They were doing speed. And I don't know how they were doing it, but they basically claimed that they were way faster than everyone else. And from their charts, they were showing the average like 150 milliseconds quicker than everyone else was, which is kind of interesting. And then there was Stackery, which was similar, another similar offering where they try to put a UI on top of Amazon, Microsoft, and their CLL environments and their APIs. Something I didn't like about a lot of these plays were a lot of them were putting UIs on top of Amazon and Azure and Microsoft and their APIs. And I don't know, I think you were saying it earlier, but Amazon comes out with a new service all the time. CloudFormation themselves can't keep up with every new service that Amazon comes out with. So how are these third parties going to keep up with it? So that's kind of my con on that one.
Yeah, I was just quoting Chris there. I was talking to him earlier.
Yeah.
So I just passed the message and
New offerings or revisions to old offerings. So.
Right. Yeah, and like CloudFormation, like sometimes it's like a 6 month like delay before CFTs are updated. So, how do you have a third party keeping up with it? So that's kind of interesting. Also, I think Spotness, their CEO, used to be, he wrote Israel's like anti-nuclear missile defense system, which was an interesting point of him. And that's all I really had. Yeah, so I think that was all I had. I haven't seen the slides in a while, so I apologize. It was a little rough, but definitely appreciate the time to come and talk, and glad we all shared some of these common viewpoints.
Go ahead and stop sharing real quick.
Yeah, I was trying to figure it out.
It's
Pause share.
Yeah, the top and stop sharing.
I think, stop share.
So if you have no exposure to Lambda, and you want to get your feet wet with it, I wrote an article on how to use Lambda. So if you have a lab, if you have your free AWS account and you're playing around with it, this is an article on how to create Lambda functions to stop your instances, and then create CloudWatch timer functions to start and stop them. So you're not going to be working in your environment at 2 o'clock in the morning. So have the Lambda functions turn off all of your boxes, and then turn them on in the morning again when you want to start playing with them again. This is a really good. This is how I taught myself how to start playing with Lambda functions. And I'm not a developer at all. Period. Full stop. Miranda, you don't even bother with this. So if you want to play with it, just go to misswire.com and Google for Lambda, and that'll pop up for you. So with that, thank you everybody for attending this evening. There's still food and beer left, so please enjoy.
No.
Hey.
Sharpies.